The air burned with acrid smoke, stinging Sergeant Juan Hayes' eyes as he crawled through the twisted wreckage of what had once been New Providence Colony's medical center. 6 hours had passed since the initial bombardment, and the settlement, once a peaceful agricultural outpost on humanity's frontier, now lay in smoldering ruins. Heat rippled from the broken concrete, each breath scorching his lungs. "Still playing hero. Hayes?" Sergeant Torres' voice crackled through his comms. "Admin building's gone. Command post too. There's nothing left worth saving." Juan ignored her, pressing his scanner deeper into the debris. The device had been calibrated for human life signs, but something was triggering faint, anomalous readings. Something alive beneath the steel and concrete. "I've got movement," he replied, digging faster through the rubble. His hands, once steady enough to perform microsurgery, now bled from a dozen cuts as he tore at the wreckage. "Someone's trapped down here." "Probably just a crushed drone," Torres muttered. "Those alien bastards left plenty behind. Pull back to rendezvous point. Colonel's orders." The scanner pulsed brighter. Definitely life signs. But the pattern was wrong. A different rhythm. Higher body temperature. Juan hesitated, then kept digging. "Hayes, you copy?" His fingers brushed against something smooth and warm. Not metal, not concrete. Flesh. But the texture was wrong. Too dense, with a subtle patterning beneath the surface. Alien. Juan cleared more debris, revealing a humanoid form, slender and tall, pinned beneath a fallen support beam. The alien's crimson skin was lacerated in multiple places, silver-blue blood congealing around a particularly devastating wound in her torso. The elaborate headdress and ceremonial armor left no doubt. This was no common soldier. "Sergeant Hayes, report your position." Torres again, impatience edging into worry. One studied the alien's face. Even unconscious, there was an unmistakable regality in her features. Intelligence, too. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes the color of cooling embers. "I've found an injured Kethar," he finally responded. "Female. High-ranking by the look of her armor." A long pause. "Kill it and get to extraction." The alien's eyes opened fully now, focusing on him with startling clarity. She made no move to fight or flee, though the pain in her gaze was unmistakable. "Negative," Juan replied, already reaching for his medical kit. "She's hurt, not hostile. Bringing her in." "Have you lost your mind?" Torres hissed. "Those things just glassed our colony. 12,000 dead. Hayes, 12,000. The alien watched him, her breathing shallow and labored. Juan detected the whistling sound of a punctured lung. Without treatment, she would drown in her own blood within hours. "She's their queen," he said quietly, recognizing the insignia on her armor from intelligence briefings. "Queen Velina of the Kethar fleet. And she's dying." "Good," Torres spat. "Let her—" Juan's fingers hovered over the field surgical kit. 5 years as a Special Forces combat medic before retiring to become the colony's doctor had ingrained certain principles. The oath he'd taken. The lives he'd sworn to save. Any lives. Under any circumstances. "I'm treating her," he said with quiet determination. "Then bringing her in. Hayes out." He muted his comms as Torres began to argue. The queen, Velina, watched him with those ember eyes, unblinking, as he scanned her injuries. Punctured lung, internal bleeding, compound fracture of what corresponded to a human femur. Survivable, if treated quickly. "I won't hurt you," he said, knowing she couldn't understand him. The translation devices were military issue, and his was back at the rendezvous point. "I'm a doctor. I'm going to help." Her lips moved, forming words in the clicking, melodic language of the Kethar. She attempted to reach for something at her waist. A weapon, perhaps. But the movement sent fresh, silver-blue blood pulsing from her wounds. Juan worked quickly, applying pressure bandages to stabilize her, while he considered his options. The rendezvous point was 40 miles away, across rugged terrain. Carrying her would be challenging, but possible. The alternative was leaving her to die, and despite everything, despite the smoking ruins of his home, he couldn't do that. "This is going to hurt," he warned, positioning himself to lift the beam off her lower body. "But I can't help you until you're free." She seemed to understand his intent, if not his words, and braced herself. As Juan heaved the beam aside, her scream cut through the air, not human, higher-pitched, more harmonic, before she clamped her jaw shut, pride reasserting itself. Working methodically, Juan sealed the puncture in her lung with a synthetic mesh, applied bone stabilizers to her fractured limb, and administered a universal hemostatic to slow the bleeding. The Cathar physiology was different enough that his treatments might not work perfectly, but they gave her a fighting chance. "Now for the hard part," he muttered, carefully lifting her. She was lighter than he expected, though still a substantial burden. Her height, nearly 7 feet, made her awkward to carry. 40 miles to go. He settled her across his shoulders in a modified fireman's carry and began walking east, away from the ruined colony center. The first 10 miles would be the worst, crossing the impact zone where Cathar weapons had reduced buildings to rubble. After that came foothills, then the limestone cave networks where the remaining colonists had established a temporary base. Overhead, the alien ship still hovered, silent sentinels ensuring the colony's destruction was complete. Juan kept to cover whenever possible, wary of both Cathar patrols and his own people. Neither would understand what he was doing. Why was he doing this? 12,000 colonists dead. His hospital destroyed. The peaceful world they'd built reduced to ash in a matter of hours. By all rights, he should hate this alien queen as much as Torres did, should want her dead for what she'd commanded. Yet as a medic, he'd learned that hatred solved nothing. Life was life. Suffering was suffering. The rest was just context. The queen stirred against his back, her breathing still labored but stronger. Her fingers grasped weakly at his shoulder, not in attack, but simply to stabilize herself. "You're heavier than you look, Your Majesty," Juan grunted, adjusting her weight. "Try to stay still. We've got a long way to go." 10 minutes later, the crack of energy weapons split the air. Juan dove behind a shattered wall, cradling the queen to prevent further injury. A squad of human soldiers moved through the ruins ahead, picking off the occasional Cathar drone. "Stay quiet," he whispered unnecessarily. The queen's eyes were alert, watching the human patrol with a mixture of pain and curiosity. Torres led the squad, her face grim beneath her helmet. Juan pressed deeper into the shadows, knowing she would kill Velina without hesitation, and possibly him as well for his betrayal. When the patrol passed, Juan waited an extra 10 minutes before resuming his journey. The queen's silence was unnerving, those ember eyes constantly studying him. "I'm not doing this because I like you," he told her, as they crossed a field of rubble that had once been the colony's main square. "I'm doing it because it's who I am, who we are, or who we're supposed to be." The sun climbed higher, baking the ruined landscape. Sweat soaked Juan's uniform as he navigated through the debris field, avoiding unstable structures and the occasional search drone. His shoulders burned with the queen's weight, but he pushed on. After 3 hours, he reached the edge of the impact zone. Ahead lay scrubland, then the rolling foothills that led to the cave network. He paused in the shadow of a half-collapsed storage facility to rest and check the queen's condition. Her wounds had stabilized, though she remained weak from blood loss. When he offered her water, she hesitated, then drank carefully from his canteen. A faint humming sound made them both freeze. A Cathar search drone drifted around the corner of the building, its sensors sweeping the area. The queen made a sudden movement, raising her hand toward the drone, but Juan pulled her down, covering them both with a thermal blanket that would mask their heat signatures. The drone hovered nearby for several agonizing minutes before continuing its patrol. When it was gone, the Queen looked at him with something like respect. "They're searching for you," Juan realized aloud. "Your people don't know you survived." She spoke again in her language, a complex series of clicks and melodic tones. Then, seeing his incomprehension, she pointed to herself, then made a sweeping gesture toward the sky where the Kethar ships loomed. "Yes, I know you're their queen," Juan nodded. "That's why I'm saving you. Because maybe, just maybe, you can stop this war before it goes any further." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded once, sharply. Whether she understood his words or merely his intent remained unclear. But some communication had been established. Juan checked her wounds once more, applied fresh bandages, then carefully lifted her again. "Time to move. We need to reach shelter before nightfall." The next phase of the journey took them across exposed terrain. Juan moved from cover to cover, aware of search patterns from both human and Kethar forces. The Queen's condition deteriorated in the heat. Her species evolved on a cooler world, and the summer temperatures of New Providence strained her already taxed system. When he spotted a collapsed storefront ahead, Shelter 1, according to the resistance markers, Juan made a dash for it. Inside, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. He gently set the Queen down on a makeshift bed of salvaged fabric. "We'll rest here," he told her, checking her vital signs again. Her temperature was elevated, but not dangerously so. The lung repair was holding. A sound at the doorway made him reach for his sidearm. Torres stepped through, followed by 2 other soldiers, their weapons already raised. "I knew you'd come this way," Torres said, her voice flat. "What I don't understand is why." Her gaze flicked to the Queen. "It should be dead already." "She," Juan corrected quietly, keeping his hand near but not on his weapon. "And she's my patient." "Patient?" Torres laughed bitterly. "That thing ordered the death of our entire colony. Tam's wife and kids were in the school when it got hit. Jesse lost his whole family when they bombed the residential sector." She gestured to the grim-faced soldiers behind her. "We've all lost everything, Hayes, and you're saving the one who gave the order." The Queen watched the exchange, her ember eyes moving from face to face. Though she couldn't understand the words, the hostility was unmistakable. "I took an oath," Juan said steadily, "to preserve life, all life." "That oath died with the colony." Torres stepped closer, her weapon now aimed squarely at the Queen. "Move aside. Hayes, we're ending this." Juan didn't move. "You'll have to shoot me first, Torres, and I don't think you want that on your conscience." "For her?" Torres' voice cracked slightly. "You'd die for this monster?" "I'd die for what we believe in," Juan replied quietly. "For the principles that separate us from those who would destroy without mercy. If we execute an injured prisoner, how are we any different from what we fear?" The 2 soldiers, Tam and Jesse, exchanged uncomfortable glances. The Queen remained silent, but her eyes never left Juan's face. "Captain Ellis," Torres said finally, her voice hoarse. "Lieutenant Maida, Corporal Zhang, Dr. Sujata. Remember their names. Hayes, your friends from the hospital, all dead because of her." The names hit like physical blows. Juan had trained with Ellis, had shared meals with Maida's family. Zhang had been barely 20, eager to learn medicine on the frontier. Dr. Sujata had been his mentor when he first arrived on New Providence. "I remember," he said softly. "I remember all of them, and I'll mourn them. But this," he gestured to the Queen, "this isn't justice. It's revenge. And once we start down that path, where does it end?" A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Torres lowered her weapon. "The Colonel will have you court-martialed for this," she warned. "If the Queen's own people don't kill you first." "I'll take that chance," Juan said. Torres turned to leave, then paused. We lost 17 more at the northern outpost this morning. Kethar drones. The war isn't over. Hayes, it's just beginning. When they were gone, Juan slumped against the wall, exhaustion crashing over him. The Queen watched him with those unnerving eyes. You probably didn't understand any of that, he said wearily. But I just risked my life for yours. I hope it's worth it. To his surprise, she responded by reaching slowly into a compartment in her armor. Juan tensed, but instead of a weapon, she withdrew a small device. With careful movements, she adjusted something on its surface, then held it to her throat. I understand more than you think, human doctor. The voice that emerged was mechanical, but the words were clear English. Your translation technology is primitive, but functional. Juan stared at her. You speak our language. I learn all languages of worlds She paused, searching for a word. Encounter. You mean worlds you destroy, Juan said flatly. The Queen's expression remained impassive. You saved my life when your soldiers would have ended it. Why? I told you I took an oath. Oaths can be broken in war. Not by me. She studied him for a long moment. You are either very foolish or very wise, human doctor. I have not decided which. The name's Juan Hayes. Juan Hayes, she repeated, the syllables strange in her mechanical voice. I am Vaylina, sovereign queen of the Kethar fleet, guardian of the 12 billion. 12 billion, Juan echoed. That's your population. What remains of it, she said, and for the first time, something like grief crossed her alien features. We must continue our journey. Juan Hayes. My people will be searching. Your people will be hunting. Neither will show mercy if we are discovered. Juan checked her injuries again. The synthetic mesh had fully bonded with her lung tissue, and the bleeding had stopped. The fracture remained problematic. She wouldn't be able to walk unaided for several days. We'll wait until dusk, he decided. Moving in daylight is too risky. Try to rest. Rest is weakness, she said, but her eyelids were already drooping. Rest is healing, Juan corrected gently, even for queens. As Vaylina slept, Juan inventoried his remaining supplies. Medical kit running low. Food and water sufficient for 3 days if carefully rationed. The cave network was still 25 miles away, through increasingly difficult terrain. Outside, thunder rumbled. A summer storm was brewing, which would provide cover from drones but make travel more treacherous. Still, it was their best opportunity to move undetected. When the Queen woke, her fever had broken. She ate the ration bar Juan offered without complaint, though her expression suggested the taste was far from pleasant. Your colony, she said abruptly. It was not a military target. Juan's hand stilled. Then why attack it? Resources. Kethar cannot process raw materials quickly enough for our needs. Your colony had refineries, processing facilities. She looked away. It was a strategic decision. 12,000 people died for your strategic decision, Juan said, anger finally breaking through his professional detachment. 12 billion will die without those resources, she countered, her mechanical voice somehow conveying intensity. My duty is to my people first. At any cost, even genocide? Survival often requires difficult choices. Juan Hayes. Outside, the storm broke, rain hammering against the ruins. Juan gathered his supplies, his movements sharp with barely contained rage. We need to move, he said shortly. Can you stand? With his assistance, Vaylina rose unsteadily. Her height made her lean heavily against him, and despite his anger, Juan adjusted his stance to better support her weight. The soldiers who wanted me dead, she said as they prepared to leave. The one called Torres. She lost comrades in our attack. We all did, Juan replied. Every person in the colony lost someone, or everyone. Yet you still aid me. Yes. Why? Juan paused at the doorway, rain soaking his uniform. Because if we become what we hate, we've already lost something more important than lives. They moved through the storm in silence, making better progress than Juan had expected. Velina proved surprisingly resilient, pushing through pain without complaint. The rain washed away their heat signatures, rendering them invisible to standard search protocols. When lightning split the sky, illuminating the landscape in stark relief, Juan glimpsed the cave entrance in the distance. Too far to reach before dawn. They would need intermediate shelter. There, Velina pointed toward a depression in the hillside. Subterranean access. Juan hesitated, then followed her guidance. The depression concealed a narrow opening, not a natural cave, but an old mining shaft from the colony's early days. They slipped inside, just as a Kethar patrol ship passed overhead, its searchlights cutting through the rain. The shaft descended steeply, forcing them to navigate by the light of Juan's field lamp. Water dripped from the ceiling, and the air grew cooler as they descended. Velina seemed to draw strength from the lower temperature, her breathing becoming more regular. "Your people built these?" she asked, examining the shaft's construction. "Early colonists," Juan confirmed, looking for minerals before they realized agriculture was more viable here. "Inefficient," she commented. "Kethar would have conducted proper surveys before mining." "Humans are sometimes impatient." "Yes," she agreed. "We have observed this trait." The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, its walls studded with phosphorescent crystals that cast an eerie blue glow. Ancient mining equipment lay abandoned in corners, covered in decades of dust. "We'll rest here until the storm passes," Juan decided, helping Velina to a relatively dry section of floor. The exertion had reopened one of her wounds, and fresh, silver-blue blood stained her armor. As he tended to her injury, she watched the crystals, something like wonder in her ember eyes. "These formations," she said softly, "they are similar to those on our ancestral world." "Your homeworld?" "Lost, now," she said, and the mechanical voice couldn't hide the sorrow. "The plague came 20 years ago. It consumed everything, crops, animals, eventually people. 3/4 of our population died before we developed immunity." Juan's hands paused in their work. "I didn't know." "How could you? Your kind sees only our ships, our weapons, not our refugees." "Refugees," Juan repeated. "The 12 billion you mentioned." She nodded. "Those who survived flee from world to world, harvesting what we need, moving on. We cannot settle. The plague lies dormant in our bodies. Any world we inhabit for too long becomes infected." The revelation shifted something in Juan's understanding. Not conquerors, but desperate survivors. It didn't excuse the destruction of New Providence, but it contextualized it in a way he hadn't considered. "Have you searched for a cure?" he asked, professional interest overriding his anger. "For 20 years, she confirmed. "Our best minds have failed. The plague adapts too quickly." "Maybe you need different minds," Juan suggested. "Human medical science might see patterns yours has missed." Velina's laugh was a harsh, clicking sound. "You offer scientific cooperation after we destroyed your colony? Your compassion borders on madness." One haze. "Not compassion," he corrected. "Pragmatism. If we can help cure your plague, you won't need our resources. No more colonies need to die." She fell silent, considering his words as he finished treating her wound. The storm continued above, but they were safe in the ancient mine, surrounded by crystals that reminded a refugee queen of her lost home. "Your medical technology," she said eventually. "It is primitive compared to ours, yet you successfully treated injuries that should have been fatal. Sometimes, simpler approaches work where complex ones fail." Juan shrugged. "That's why collaboration helps. Different perspectives." "Perhaps," she conceded, then winced as she shifted position. "How much farther to your resistance base?" Another day's journey. The caves are extensive. Natural limestone formations. Your ship's sensors won't penetrate them easily. And when we arrive, will I be a prisoner? One hadn't thought that far ahead. I don't know, he admitted. But I'll ensure you're treated properly. Your colonel may disagree. Probably. Juan smiled faintly. But I can be persuasive. They rested through the worst of the storm, taking turns keeping watch. When Juan woke from a brief sleep, he found Velina studying his medical scanner with evident interest. Ingenious design, she commented. Inefficient power usage, but the diagnostic algorithms are elegant. Thanks, I think, Juan yawned, checking the time. Storm's passing. We should move while we still have darkness. The journey resumed, slower now as they navigated the foothills. Velina's condition had improved enough that she could walk with Juan's support, though the fractured limb still caused her considerable pain. Dawn found them at an abandoned mining station, one of many outposts established during the colony's founding. The small, prefabricated structure offered shelter and, surprisingly, a functioning water reclaimer. We'll rest here today, Juan decided, helping Velina onto a dusty bench. Travel after dark. As he prepared a meager meal from his rations, Velina examined the human facility with evident curiosity. Your species builds temporary structures even when you intend permanent settlements, she observed. Why? We adapt as we go, Juan explained. Plans change, needs evolve. Inefficient, she said again, but without her earlier dismissiveness. But flexible, Juan countered. Your approach, planning everything perfectly, works until something unexpected happens. Like a plague. She acknowledged the point with a slight inclination of her head. Perhaps there is wisdom in imperfection. They shared the meal in companionable silence. Afterward, as Juan checked her injuries again, Velina surprised him with a question. You had family in the colony? The question reopened wounds he'd been avoiding. No, he said quietly. Not anymore. My wife died 2 years ago. Neurological disorder. Nothing I could do, despite all my training. I am sorry, she said, the mechanical voice struggling with the emotion. It happens. Juan shrugged, his casual tone belying the pain. What about you? Does the queen of the Kethar have family? A queen is mother to her people, Velina said formally, then added with unexpected candor. But no mate, no offspring. The plague took them. Along with my birth clan, they sat with their shared losses. 2 enemies finding unexpected common ground in grief. Why did you become a healer? She asked eventually. To fix what's broken, Juan answered simply. In people. In the world. Naive. I know. Not naive, she corrected. Noble. The day passed slowly. Juan took inventory of their remaining supplies while Velina rested. Her recovery was progressing well. Too well, perhaps. Soon she would no longer need his help. And then what? Would she return to her fleet and continue the campaign against human colonies? Would all of this have been for nothing? As if sensing his thoughts, Velina spoke. Other colonies will be targeted. New Sydney, Terra Nova, Horizon. All have resources we need. One's blood went cold. More massacres. Survival, she corrected, but without conviction. There has to be another way, Juan insisted. Cooperation, trade, shared research for a cure. Would your people trade with those who destroyed New Providence? She challenged. Would they not seek vengeance instead? Some would, Juan admitted, but not all. Humans can surprise you. As you have surprised me, she acknowledged. That evening, as they prepared to depart, Juan noticed Velina's breathing had become labored again. A quick scan revealed the cause. Infection was setting in, accelerated by the alien environment and her weakened state. We need to move faster, he said, concern evident in his voice. You need proper medical care. "I will endure," she stated, but her steps were unsteady as they set out. The final phase of their journey took them through increasingly rugged terrain. Velina's condition deteriorated rapidly, her silver-blue blood now tinged with black, a sign of advancing infection. By midnight, she could barely walk, even with Juan's support. "Leave me," she commanded as they paused on a rocky outcrop. "Save yourself, Juan Hayes." "Not happening," he replied firmly, lifting her into his arms despite her weak protests. "We're finishing this together." The cave entrance was now visible in the distance, marked by faint lights that would be invisible to aerial surveillance. Juan pressed on, his muscles screaming with the effort of carrying the tall alien queen across the difficult terrain. Twice they had to hide as patrols passed, once human, once Cathar. Each time, Velina's breathing grew more labored, her temperature rising dangerously. "Stay with me," Juan urged when her eyes began to flutter closed. "Just a little farther." The infection was spreading faster than he'd anticipated, accelerated by her alien physiology's reaction to Earth bacteria. Without intervention, she would die before dawn. When they finally reached a sheltered ravine just half a mile from the cave entrance, Juan made a difficult decision. Velina needed surgery immediately. He couldn't wait until they reached the resistance base. "I need to operate," he told her, setting up his field kit in the narrow confines of the ravine. "Now, the infection's spreading to your cardiovascular system." "Without proper facilities?" she questioned weakly. "Without proper anything," he admitted. "But it's that or lose you." Her ember eyes searched his face. "Why does it matter if I live or die? Juan Hayes, I am your enemy." "Not anymore," he said simply. "Now you're my patient. And maybe, just maybe, the only hope for peace." With that, he administered the strongest antibiotic in his kit and began the delicate process of locating and excising the infected tissue. Working by headlamp in a rocky ravine was far from ideal, but Juan's hands were steady, as they had been on countless battlefields before. Cathar anatomy differed significantly from human, but the basics, circulation, respiration, immune response, followed similar enough patterns that he could adapt his techniques. The real challenge was the infection itself, which had formed a biofilm unlike anything he'd encountered. An hour into the surgery, search drones passed overhead. Juan froze, scalpel poised above Velina's open wound, as the mechanical whine grew closer. If they were discovered now, both would die. He couldn't abandon the surgery, and she couldn't be moved. The drones paused directly above the ravine, sensors sweeping the area. Juan held his breath, counting seconds that stretched into minutes. Finally, the drones moved on, their attention drawn by something in the distance. "That was close," he murmured, returning to his work. "Stay with me, Your Majesty. Almost done." By dawn, the surgery was complete. Juan had removed the infected tissue, flushed the wound with his remaining antibiotics, and sealed it with the last of his synthetic mesh. Now all he could do was wait and hope Velina's own immune system could handle the rest. He sat beside her unconscious form, monitoring her vital signs as the sun climbed higher. They were dangerously exposed here, but he dared not move her yet. Not until he was certain the infection was contained. Hours passed. Juan dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound. When Velina finally stirred, the sun was already beginning its descent. "You're still here," she observed, her voice weak but clear through the translator. "Told you I would be." Juan smiled tiredly. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been dissected," she replied with unexpected humor. "But alive. You succeeded." "For now," he cautioned. "We still need to get you proper care. Can you move?" With his help, she managed to sit up. The color had returned to her crimson skin, and her eyes burned brighter than before. "My fleet," she said suddenly, reaching for a device on her armor. "I must contact them." Juan tensed. "To do what?" Instead of answering, she activated the communication device. A holographic display sprang to life, showing a star chart with multiple planets highlighted, human colonies. Juan realized with dread. Velina spoke rapidly in her native language, her tone commanding despite her weakened state. The response came immediately, a male Cathar voice responding with what sounded like surprise, then acknowledgement. One by one, the highlighted planets on the display dimmed. "What did you do?" Juan asked, hardly daring to hope. "Ordered the fleet to stand down," Velina said simply. "No more attacks on human colonies, for now." "Why?" She looked at him directly, ember eyes unblinking. "Because one human carried an enemy queen 40 miles across hostile terrain to save her life. Because perhaps there are alternatives to our current path. Because 12 billion lives might depend on finding another way." Relief flooded through Juan, so intense it left him lightheaded. "Thank you," he said inadequately. "Do not thank me yet," she cautioned. "This is a temporary measure. My commanders will expect a permanent solution. Resources. A cure. Something to justify sparing your worlds. We'll find one," Juan promised. Together. They reached the resistance base by nightfall. Velina, leaning heavily on Juan, but walking under her own power. The entrance was guarded by grim-faced soldiers, who raised their weapons at the sight of the Cathar Queen. "Lower your weapons," Juan called out. "She's under my protection, and she's just saved every human colony in the sector." Colonel Reeves met them inside, his expression thunderous. "Sergeant Hayes, you have some explaining to do." "Sir," Juan acknowledged, still supporting Velina. "This is Queen Velina of the Cathar fleet. She's ordered her forces to cease attacks on human settlements." "And we're supposed to trust the word of the alien who destroyed New Providence?" Reeves demanded. "You can verify it," Velina said calmly. "Your orbital sensors will confirm my fleet has withdrawn to high orbit. No attack vessels deployed." The colonel's eyes narrowed, but he gestured to a communications officer, who quickly confirmed the Cathar ships had indeed pulled back. "Why the change of heart, Your Majesty?" Reeves asked, suspicion evident. "Your Sergeant Hayes has demonstrated there may be alternatives to our current strategy," Velina replied diplomatically. "I am exploring options." "She needs medical attention," Juan interjected. "And we need to talk, all of us, about the real reason the Cathar are attacking our colonies." Over the next hours, in the makeshift medical bay, Velina explained the Cathar situation to an increasingly somber audience of human military and scientific personnel. The plague, the refugee fleet, the desperate search for resources. "Our scientists have hit a dead end," she concluded. 20 years of research, and the plague still adapts faster than we can develop countermeasures. Dr. Liana Santos, the Resistance's chief medical officer, examined the data Velina provided with growing interest. "Your approach focuses on aggressive countermeasures," she noted. "But what about symbiotic integration? Teaching the immune system to live with the pathogen rather than eliminate it?" Velina tilted her head. "Explain." As the scientists began a rapid exchange of ideas, Colonel Reeves pulled Juan aside. "You took one hell of a risk, Hayes," he said quietly. "If you'd been wrong about her." "But I wasn't," Juan replied. "Sir, this could change everything. A cooperative approach instead of warfare." "It's not that simple," Reeves cautioned. "High Command will want retribution for New Providence. 12,000 dead isn't something they'll forgive easily." 12,000 versus 12 billion, Juan countered. "And how many more if the war continues? We have to try for peace." 3 days later, as Velina's health stabilized, a meeting was arranged on neutral ground, a plateau midway between the human base and the nearest Cathar landing site. Portable shelters were erected, and representatives from both sides gathered under the watchful eyes of their respective security forces. Admiral Corvex, Velina's second-in-command, arrived with obvious reluctance. his posture rigid with disapproval as he surveyed the human delegation. "This is unprecedented, my queen," he said in their language, though the translation devices carried his words to human ears. "Negotiating with lesser species." "Watch your tongue, Admiral," Velina reprimanded. "These lesser species may hold the key to our survival." The negotiations were tense at first. Colonel Reeves demanded accountability for New Providence, while Admiral Corvex insisted on guaranteed access to necessary resources. 1. Positioned between the two delegations as a mediator of sorts. Watched the familiar patterns of conflict threatening to derail the fragile peace. "Enough," he finally interrupted, as voices rose on both sides. "We're missing the point. This isn't about blame or resources. It's about finding a solution that ensures both our species survive." He turned to the assembled scientists. "Dr. Santos, explain your theory again. For everyone." Santos stepped forward, her dark eyes intense. "The Cathar plague has persisted because your immune systems are fighting it directly, triggering its adaptive mechanisms. But what if instead of fighting it, you incorporated it, made it part of your biology, the way Earth species have done with mitochondria, once separate organisms, now essential cellular components?" Admiral Corvex scoffed. "Impossible." "Not according to our preliminary models," Santos countered, displaying data on a holographic projector. "Combined with targeted genetic therapy and environmental adaptations, it could work. But we need more data. Complete access to Cathar medical records, test subjects, time." "And in exchange," Admiral Corvex demanded. "Safe harbor," Colonel Reeves said, surprising everyone. "Designated planets where Cathar can settle temporarily while research progresses. Regulated resource extraction with minimal environmental impact. A cooperative approach instead of conquest." The negotiations continued for days, stretching into weeks. Scientists from both species worked feverishly, exchanging data, testing theories, building models. Juan divided his time between the research teams and the diplomatic efforts, his unique position as Velina's savior giving him credibility with both sides. 1 month after the fall of New Providence, the first breakthrough came. A combined human Cathar research team successfully developed a treatment protocol that showed promise in initial trials. The plague could potentially be converted from deadly parasite to symbiotic partner, though the process would take years to implement fully. As the research accelerated, tensions between the species gradually eased. Joint settlements were established on uninhabited worlds, with strict protocols to prevent plague transmission. Resource-sharing agreements were negotiated, sometimes contentiously, but always with the shared goal of mutual survival. Through it all, Juan and Velina maintained the unlikely bond forged during their desperate journey. As her strength returned fully, she often sought his perspective on human customs and behaviors, while he found himself fascinated by Cathar history and philosophy. "Your species values individual choice above collective need," she observed one evening as they watched the twin moons rise over the plateau where negotiations were ongoing. "It makes you unpredictable." "And yours values order above freedom," Juan countered. "It makes you inflexible." "Perhaps both approaches have merit," she conceded. "In different circumstances. Maybe that's why we needed to find each other," Juan suggested. Balance. 6 months after their first meeting in the ruins of New Providence, the Cathar fleet prepared to depart for the designated research worlds. The plague treatment protocol was showing consistent success in trials, and though years of work remained, hope had replaced desperation in Cathar planning. Velina found Juan at the edge of the settlement, watching the ship's preparations. "You're leaving," he said. "Not a question." "My place is with my people," she confirmed. "As yours is here, rebuilding what was lost." New Providence would never be restored, but a memorial had been established, and plans for a new colony, jointly operated by humans and Cathar, were underway. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a path forward from tragedy. Will I see you again? Juan asked. I would hope so, Vaylina said, her mechanical translator somehow conveying warmth. Perhaps you might visit my world someday. See the crystal formations that match those in your caves. Meet the people you helped save. I'd like that, Juan nodded. And perhaps you could visit Earth. See where we began. A cultural exchange, she agreed. The first of many, if this peace holds. They stood in companionable silence, human and alien. Former enemies now something more complex. Not quite friends, not quite allies, but connected by a shared journey and a mutual recognition of something valuable in the other. One act of mercy, Vaylina mused. One human carrying one queen across 40 miles of hostile terrain? Who could have predicted it would change the course of two civilizations? Maybe that's all it ever takes, Juan suggested. One person refusing to see an enemy, and choosing to see a life worth saving instead. As the Kethar ships rose into the evening sky, their lights merging with the emerging stars, Juan felt neither triumph nor loss, but something rarer, hope. Not for himself, nor even for humanity alone, but for the possibility that different worlds might find ways to coexist despite their differences. Somewhere above, a refugee queen looked down at a scarred planet and saw not conquest denied, but connection gained. And somewhere below, a human healer looked up at departing ships and saw not enemies retreating, but a journey just beginning. The distance between them, 40 miles once traversed in pain and desperation, now spanned light years. Yet in the ways that mattered most, they had never been closer.